and had dressed at the Conservative Club, and his lordship had ordered that the programme of dances should be begun. Denry learnt this as soon as he emerged, effulgent, from the gentlemen's cloak-room into the broad, red-carpeted corridor which runs from end to end of the ground floor of the Town Hall. Many important townspeople were chatting in the corridor. The innumerable Swetnam family, the Stanways, the great Etches, the Fernses, Mrs. Clayton Vernon, the Suttons, including Beatrice Sutton. Of course, everyone knew him for Duncalf's shorthand clerk and the son of the flannel washer, but universal white kid gloves constitute a democracy, and Shillitoe could put more style into a suit than any other tailor in the Five Towns. "How do?" The eldest of the Swetnam boys nodded carelessly. "How do, Swetnam?" said Denry, with equal carelessness. The thing was accomplished. That greeting was like a Masonic initiation, and henceforth he was the peer of no matter whom. At first he had thought that 400 eyes would be fastened on him, their glance saying, "This youth is wearing a dress suit for the first time, and it is not paid for either." But it was not so. And the reason was that the entire population of the Town Hall was heartily engaged in pretending that never in its life had it been seen after 7 o'clock of a night, apart from a dress suit. Denry observed with joy that while numerous middle-aged and awkward men wore red or white silk handkerchiefs in their waistcoats, such peoples as Charles Fearns, the Swetnams, and Harold Etches did not. He was, then, in the shyness of his handkerchief, on the side of the angels. He passed up the double staircase, decorated with white or pale frocks of unparalleled richness, and so into the grand hall. A scarlet orchestra was on the platform, and many people strolled about the floor in attitudes of expectation. The walls were festooned with flowers. The thrill of being magnificent seized him, and he was drenched in a vast desire to be truly magnificent himself. He dreamt of magnificence, and boot-brushes kept sticking out of this dream like black mud out of snow. In his reverie he looked about for Ruth Earp, but she was invisible. Then he went downstairs again idly, gorgeously feigning that he spent 6 evenings a week in ascending and descending monumental staircases appropriately clad. He was determined to be as sublime as anyone. There was a stir in the corridor, and the sublimest consented to be excited. The Countess was announced to be imminent. Everybody was grouped round the main portal, careless of temperatures. 6 times was the Countess announced to be imminent before she actually appeared, expanding from the narrow gloom of her black carriage like a magic vision. Aldermen received her, and they did not do it with any excess of gracefulness. They seemed afraid of her, as though she were recovering from influenza, and they feared to catch it. She had precisely the same high voice and precisely the same efficient smile as she had employed to Denry. And these instruments worked marvels on aldermen. They were as melting as salt on snow. The Countess disappeared upstairs in a cloud of shrill apologies and trailing aldermen. She seemed to have greeted everybody except Denry. Somehow he was relieved that she had not drawn attention to him. He lingered, hesitating, and then he saw a being in a long yellow overcoat, with a bit of peacock's feather at the summit of a shiny high hat. This being held a lady's fur mantle. Their eyes met. Denry had to decide instantly. He decided. "Hello, Jock," he said. "Hello, Denry," said the other, pleased. "What's been happening?" Denry inquired, friendly. Then Jock told him about the antics of one of the Countess's horses. He went upstairs again, and met Ruth Earp coming down. She was glorious in white. Except that nothing glittered in her hair, she looked the very equal of the Countess, at a little distance, plain though her features were. "What about that waltz?" Denry began informally. "That waltz is nearly over," said Ruth Earp with chilliness. "I suppose you've been staring at her ladyship with all the other men." "I'm awfully sorry," he said. "I didn't know the waltz was..." "Well, why didn't you look at your programme?" "Haven't got one." he said naively. He had omitted to take a programme. Ninny. Barbarian. "Better get one," she said cuttingly, somewhat in her rôle of dancing mistress. "Can't we finish the waltz?" he suggested, crestfallen. "No," she said, and continued her solitary way downwards. She was hurt. He tried to think of something to say that was equal to the situation and equal to the style of his suit, but he could not. In a moment he heard her below him greeting some male acquaintance in the most effusive way. Yet if Denry had not committed a wicked crime for her, she could never have come to the dance at all. He got a programme, and with terror gripping his heart he asked sundry young and middle-aged women whom he knew by sight and by name for a dance. Ruth had taught him how to ask. Not one of them had a dance left. Several looked at him as much as to say, "You must be a goose to suppose that my programme is not filled up in the twinkling of my eye." Then he joined a group of despisers of dancing near the main door. Harold Etches was there, the wealthiest manufacturer of his years, barely 24, in the Five Towns. Also Shillitoe, cause of another of Denry's wicked crimes. The group was taciturn, critical, and very doggish. The group observed that the Countess was not dancing. The Earl was dancing, need it be said, with Mrs. Jos Curtenty, second wife of the Deputy Mayor. But the Countess stood resolutely smiling, surrounded by aldermen. Possibly she was getting her breath. Possibly nobody had the pluck to ask her. Anyway, she seemed to be stranded there, on a beach of aldermen. Very wisely she had brought with her no members of a house party from Sneyd Hall. Members of a house party at a municipal ball invariably operate as a bar between greatness and democracy, and the Countess desired to participate in the life of the people. "Why don't some of those Johnnies ask her?" Denry burst out. He had hitherto said nothing in the group, and he felt that he must be a man with the rest of them. "Well, you go and do it. It's a free country," said Shillitoe. "So I would for 2 pins," said Denry. Harold Etches glanced at him, apparently resentful of his presence there. Harold Etches was determined to put the extinguisher on him. "I'll bet you a fiver you don't," said Etches scornfully. "I'll take you," said Denry very quickly, and very quickly walked off. 7. "She can't eat me. She can't eat me." That was what he said to himself as he crossed the floor. People seemed to make a lane for him, divining his incredible intention. If he had not started at once, if his legs had not started of themselves, he would never have started, and, not being in command of a fiver, he would afterwards have cut a preposterous figure in the group. But started he was, like a piece of clockwork that could not be stopped. In the grand crises of his life, something not himself, something more powerful than himself, jumped up in him and forced him to do things. Now, for the first time, he seemed to understand what had occurred with him in previous crises. In a second, so it appeared, he had reached the Countess. Just behind her was his employer, Mr. Duncalf, whom Denry had not previously noticed there. Denry regretted this, for he had never mentioned to Mr. Duncalf that he was coming to the ball, and he feared Mr. Duncalf. "Could I have this dance with you?" he demanded bluntly, but smiling and showing his teeth. No ceremonial title, no mention of pleasure or of honour, not a trace of the formula in which Ruth Earp had instructed him. He forgot all such trivialities. "I've won that fiver, Mr. Harold Etches," he said to himself. The mouths of aldermen inadvertently opened. Mr. Duncalf blenched. "It's nearly over, isn't it?" said the Countess, still efficiently smiling. She did not recognise Denry. In that suit he might have been a Foreign Office attaché. "Oh, that doesn't matter, I'm sure," said Denry. She yielded, and he took the paradisiacal creature in his arms. It was her business that evening to be universally and inclusively polite. She could not have begun with a refusal. A refusal might have dried up all other invitations whatsoever. Besides, she saw that the alderman